This busy, educated generation still may resort to yelling, hitting, or even ignoring their children with detrimental results. Nyasha Smith-Ruddock, a social worker, family therapist, and mother of four, shares with us her techniques of mindful parenting. I started this podcast to compare and contrast immigrant child rearing practice with North American norms, and it ended up with some amazing insights applicable to all families. I'm first joined by Renee Simons, who gives us some insights she has gleaned from her upbringing as a third-generation American raised in part by a strict Trinidadian grandfather. Listen to the end.
Baransu Balance podcast with Dr. Ince emphasizes the interdependence and importance of a healthy mind, body, and soul.
Okay. Welcome, Renee Simons, to another episode of Baransu Balance podcast.
Same.
Right. So I was looking at a statistic in Canada. It's actually 1 in 4 people are first generation immigrants, and in the United States, I believe it's about 1 in 10 first generation. So
Across all cultures?
over 35 million first generation immigrants. Right.
Across all cultures.
Yes.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
So
And one other piece of research that I know I did, and wrote a couple of papers about it, is that what typically happens, all cultures, the first generation is attached to that culture. They are Irish, they are Trinidadian, Bayesian, Jamaican. They don't think of it any other way but by the country, right? If you're an immigrant first generation. The second generation, if they're born in the country that they're now in, want to be as American as apple pie. Don't talk to them about the heritage company. I'm an American. I'm here. I want their habits. I want their values. I want their things, and feel inhibited sometimes by the culture of their parents.
So
Third
I'm
generation,
okay.
me, there's a resurgence and a desire to more identify with that original country.
Okay. So I'm speaking about that first generation and their their child rearing styles. How would you describe grandfather's child rearing style? Was it a democratic style or authoritarian style?
I think it's a generational thing and also an immigrant thing. I think that generation really were very authoritarian, probably very sexist in the sense that the woman had a role and there was a male role.
Okay, so you may be right, because I was looking at this book about the immigrant family. It was written a while back, and it just idealizes the life in the West Indies. West Indies is fresh air, milking cows, birds chirping, and then you get to Canada and there's tiredness, running to catch the bus, snow, cold, stress, and my husband, who's from Trinidad, he is always talking about how they ran free, picking mangoes and just all kinds of positive memories. And then, like you said, the ideal role of the mother was to stay at home, cook, iron, take care of the kids, and the father was to go out and fix things and work and even be in charge of the discipline. So
Right.
so
I think in
it
our
might
family,
be a generation thing. It's not just an immigrant.
it's not just an immigrant. I think it's a generational thing, made more complex by the fact they're immigrants because overseas that was the norm, whereas in the United States, most people at that time were so assimilated that it was more Americanized, which didn't have necessarily that hard and fast and reinforced structure. Remember, religion was not, it was important, but on waning, whereas in the islands, it just was. There wasn't anyone who didn't go to church regularly. There wasn't very many people who weren't attached to some of those values. Whereas in the States, I believe that people were changing their value set. So children were allowed to talk back. West Indians would never, as immigrants, allow any of their children to talk back.
So
But they would,
were you allowed, was your mother allowed to go out and hang out
no,
on the street corner and
no.
uh
I mean, hanging out in the street
mhm,
corner, absolutely not. You
mhm,
had to be home
mhm,
and studying
right.
with your books open.
Mhm,
None of that chit chat, none of that social interaction. And that was difficult because, as I mentioned, a second generation wants to be American.
mhm,
So they want that freedom that their peers have where they can
mhm.
hang out,
Okay, so
socialize, dance.
we're gonna take a quick break. We have Okay, welcome Nyasha. I'm so happy to finally get you on the air, all the way from Toronto, Canada.
It's good to
So,
be here.
thank you. So we have a listener with a question that she would like to ask you.
Okay.
We have a caller, Yasmin, all the way from Orlando, Florida.
Um, in this day and age, what are some suggestions that you or Renee might have for discipline with younger children, like toddlers, um, and how do you deal with that?
Okay. So I really believe in parenting. It's not a perfect journey. We make mistakes along the way. There's no such thing as a perfect parent, but there is an opportunity to be a present parent. And when I say present, I mean to be mindful in your parenting journey. So we talk in counseling about mindfulness all the time. And it's possible even when we're disciplining our children to come from a mindful perspective. So I
Hmm.
use an acronym that I'd like to call AWARE. So when you're being mindful, you're aware. So the A stands for acknowledge. Acknowledge their feelings. When they're upset, they're frustrated, they might be whining, and that kind of triggers our own frustration as parents. We acknowledge and accept. So we say, it sounds like you're upset. Sounds like you're sad. You must be excited. You must be afraid or worried or curious. So you're always going to acknowledge the behavior and accept that it is what it is. And for children, it may feel different than we think it should. And they may be acting in ways that we don't appreciate. But you're going to acknowledge and accept it. Then you're going to wait. So the W for the aware is wait. Slow down your parenting. Immediacy isn't always necessary, so take time for self awareness and acknowledge what's going on in your own body as you're dealing with the behaviors of your child. Number three, the A, address the issue. So focus on correcting the behavior, not the child. So you're dealing with manipulation or guilt or shame for your own self. I want you to take the time to stick to the topic, separate the issue from the individual. Instead of saying you're a liar, you might say something like, I don't think that sounds very truthful. So you're not saying that the child is, you're saying the behavior is. The next is to relate. So I always say there's no correction without connection. So make the connection. This might mean putting your hand on the child, touching them, physical touch in a loving manner. If they're in the right space for that, with permission, you can touch them and say, hey, I notice you're not behaving the way that mommy expects you to. And then you're going to go in with those awareness and the understanding that their feelings or emotion is not acceptable, but understood. And then the last is to evaluate, check and reflect. After you've done the discipline, you're also always going to take the time for self-reflection. Could I have done anything differently or better? How am I feeling now? And how is my child feeling? What lessons have you learned through the process? How was your connection? And, celebrate the successes if you had success. And the reason why I say we have opportunities to check and reflect and evaluate, because I said there's no perfect parent. We're all in this journey together. It's more important to be present and aware in parenting than it is to be perfect in the journey.
Okay. So with the mindfulness, you're saying that we're not to fly in with our temper raging or just reach back to our childhood and bring out a
Yes.
stick and whack. So
Yeah.
you said to acknowledge. So if you have a young child who is having a tantrum and has thrown down or thrown something at another child, what was the first step?
Yeah. So acknowledge.
Acknowledge.
Yes.
So
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 see,
so Johnny, you seem to be upset.
yeah.
That's the
You seem
first.
to be upset.
The A
It
is to
might be.
acknowledge.
It's acknowledge the feelings because what led to the throwing? I think we're going right to the throwing. There might be something that happened before. And so
Hmm.
always be curious as a parent. So what exactly
Okay.
happened? Did I miss something? I noticed the toy flying across the room, but what
Okay.
happened before that toy flew across the room?
Okay. So this process of mindfulness it should help the child to be aware of their own emotions.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it might cause this conversation might help them to either self-regulate or
Mhm.
we using physical touch, coming close, leaning in, we might help them co-regulate. So we're doing it alongside them. So
Okay.
we're acknowledging our own feelings and helping them to acknowledge and name their feelings too.
Okay. At this point, should we be acknowledging our feelings with them? You say, Johnny, this is making mommy upset.
It's normal for us to feel like at this moment we should be acknowledged, our feelings should be acknowledged. But this
Mhm.
moment is not about
That's
us.
not
We're
okay.
the,
Got it.
we're the adults in the space.
Okay.
And although we're accustomed to wanting our feelings to come first and foremost, we're going to take a
Okay.
deep breath and we're going to make it about them. So we're going to
Okay.
say,
Okay.
hey, I notice you're upset,
Okay.
you know, and take it from there.
Okay. So, and I, I said that we need mutual respect. So that's not the time for mutual respect.
There is mutual respect, but we want to understand what caused what is really going on here,
Okay.
right? And
Hmm.
why is it that we don't want him to Johnny to throw the toy? Is it because it's not safe? If it's not safe, then we're going to address that rather than
It's
how it makes me feel.
it's not safe and it's not appropriate behavior in
Okay.
in today's
What make
society.
Absolutely, but what makes the behavior not appropriate? So we want to focus on that. It's not appropriate because you could hurt somebody. It's not appropriate because that's not how we share if it's about sharing. But
Mhm.
that's why you want to find the context so that you can address specific behavior rather than how it makes me feel.
Okay. And then Are there any consequences from this throwing the toy across the room for the
Absolutely.
child?
There are always consequences. Some of those
Okay.
consequences are logical. Some
Mm-hmm.
of those consequences are natural.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of the natural consequences come in situations like, do not touch the stove, Johnny.
Mm-hmm.
Do not touch the stove, Jane. They touch the
Mm-hmm.
stove anyway. The natural
Okay.
consequence is a burned hand.
Okay.
Now, in other circumstances, like a child throwing a ball across the room, you might
Mm-hmm.
say, what is the rule? So you can't have consequences without having rules and
Uh,
expectations. And we
so
must
this
make sure
so
that
this
our
is
rule mhm,
are
and expectations
consistent.
are very clear.
Oh, okay.
They're clear. So what
Mm-hmm.
is the rule about throwing things across the room?
Um, Loss of ability to play with the toy.
Well, that's definitely the consequence. But
Okay.
the rule might be that we don't throw toys around the house.
Okay.
Or it might be we play with the ball outside,
Okay.
right? So
Okay.
unlike the Ten Commandments, our rules that we have in our home should always come from the positive perspective. It's about the behavior we want to see more of, not the
Okay.
behavior we want to see less of. So we're
Okay.
always focusing on what we want to see more of. So for instance, if ball is to be played outside and not thrown around the room, then the rule in the house is we play ball outside. And so
Okay.
when the ball is thrown across the room in the house, you're going to say, hey, Johnny, where do we play? What's the rule about where we play ball?
Okay.
Then they know the rule. And once they verbalize it, there's no going back. So you
Okay.
ask, what is the rule? And they say, we play ball outside. Okay. All right. Are you doing that? Or what's going on? No, I threw the ball across the room. Now they're owning the behavior.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So the rule about throwing, so then you can say to them at that point, you make a decision. Do you take the ball or do you say, okay, then play the ball outside? You open the door and send them out to play. If on their way outside, they decide to throw the ball again across the room,
Mm-hmm.
then you make the decision about the consequence. Okay, Johnny, I'm going to take the ball away for 5 minutes. The ball goes away for 5 minutes. You take the ball, you put it aside for 5 minutes. After the 5 minutes, you give the ball back to Johnny in the house and see how he deals with the ball. Now,
Okay.
if he takes the ball immediately outside, the next step that you make is to say, good job for playing with the ball outside.
Oh,
Once
okay.
again, reinforcing the behavior we want to see more of rather than the one we want to see less of. You're also not giving back the ball and saying, now you better not throw that ball around the house. I'm going to take it away again. No, we
Mm-hmm.
want them to go back into the situation thinking that they can be successful and looking for that success the next time around.
Oh, wow. Okay. Excellent advice. Thank you, Nyasha.
You're so welcome.
So we had mentioned at the beginning of the podcast earlier that we're going to wind up with talking about um, unintended consequences. So when I was a younger parent and we would hang out with friends in our home, there was almost like a bragging, rights. Oh, yes. When I was young, I didn't, like you said, I didn't dare say that because I would be swatted out to kingdom come. I brought you in, I can take you out. And the stories that I heard from my immigrant family, including my husband's, my on my mother's side and father's side, to me were just not bordered on abuse, but was abuse. You know, there's one story that I heard of a diminutive a mother tying her older sons to a pole to beat them, or another one having them kneel down, and it's just really horrendous stories. That and I know that a lot of this is not even legal nowadays. The the natural tendency for a generation that was brought up like that is to go the other direction. Very permissive. It's okay to talk back because you're just expressing yourself, or it's okay that I have to tell you 5 times to get up before you get up, or it's okay that, you get C's or D's because you're doing the best that you can. I put that in quotes or end quotes. So, w- what is there such a thing as swinging in the other direction, and what are some of the unintended consequences of, rebelling from a very strict and often abusive childhood? Let's start with Renee.
Well, as the pendulum switches to be more lenient, I think there's a price potentially to pay. You know, all children rebel when they become teenagers. So if you have a teenager that has been responding, you'll say, "Could you come here, please?" And they say no. Or could you sit down and do your homework? And they say, "I don't want to." Think about what that child is going to say to you when they're 14. And the kids think that talking back is an okay thing to do. It's harder to manage. So
Hmm.
there's a risk in being too lenient and not providing boundaries of behavior.
Hmm.
Or, and I apologize for the scratching. That's my dog trying to get into my room where I am. Um, I think that there's a risk, and so while again I don't have these grandchildren, I have been exposed to children, and I still feel that there need to be boundaries because you'll have to live with those behaviors once they're teenagers, and you can lose control.
Nyasha, the same question to you. What happens if we swing from an authoritarian parenting style to a permissive style? From it's my way or the highway without any questions to I just want to be your friend and whatever goes.
Yeah, definitely. So what I hear you just talking about is not being that kind of perfect parent, not being the present parent, but being more of a permissive parent. So we're trying to kind of bring us to that medium where we're not all the way over here, very, very strict. Kids have, they should be seen and not heard. And that other part that says every single thing that a child does should be validated. And trying to find that sweet spot in between. I definitely think it's very hard to make generalizations about any age range or generation. But I will say that permissive parenting is not necessarily good parenting. I definitely know that trauma that we've experienced in our past has often creates situations where we want to do things in ways that we've never experienced it before because we're afraid that we will also traumatize our own children in terms of the way that we discipline them. There is that safe place in the parenting where I'm talking about being present because it helps you to be aware of your own emotions and feelings about why you're behaving the way you're behaving and why you're doing what you're doing. We never want to be parenting out of fear. We never want to be parenting out of a place of just doing everything opposite of the way that I was parenting. And
Okay.
a lot of the times, some of the decisions we're making, we need to stop and think, where is this coming from? And that can happen on either side of the gamut. So that present parenting allows you to stop for a moment and ask yourself, why?
So
I can give you an
so
example. Can I
so
give
you're again with the W. Pause. Wait.
pause? Wait,
Okay.
wait. And
Yes.
it's
Okay.
not easy. It is not always easy. Even often parenting strategies these days say you ask your child to do something And we always were raised to believe, most of us were raised to believe, that children should do things as soon as we speak.
Mm-hmm.
But this present parenting says, take up 5 seconds. Take 5 seconds. And I don't mean count aloud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, that's an internal. So you ask them, Johnny, can you come to the table for dinner? You count in your head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If he doesn't come to the table for dinner, then you'll repeat yourself. Johnny, mommy called you to the the table for dinner. It's time to eat. If he doesn't come, then you deal with what you have to do, the logical consequence. What does that look like? And how much time can you afford in the moment? But that moment, that 5 seconds, gives you an opportunity to do just what you just did, and that's take a breath.
Okay.
And so often we don't take a breath. We want it done and we want it done now. And so when they don't do it, then we get into the escalation trap. We start yelling and they start retaliating, and we start yelling and they start retaliating, and nobody wants to go to the table for dinner anymore.
Right. So,
So that 5 seconds help us to eliminate the escalation trap.
all right. So that was your example of, and the consequence would be
Yeah.
what?
The consequence might be a time in or a time out. So it might
Mm,
be, okay, Johnny, you were watching TV. I'm going to take you from the TV and bring you to the timeout spot. You sit at the timeout spot for whatever the allocated time was that we set. We set because you already know about the timeout spot. I'm not just making it up on the fly. You know that if the behaviors occur that are not appropriate, that go against the rules that are in the home, the next place that you'll end up is the timeout spot.
okay.
Go for that set time, and then when the time is up, you invite Johnny to the table for dinner again. And the hope is that Johnny comes happily to the table.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate that. And I'm going to end with a question about the goal of being like everyone else in the neighborhood or your city or your country. Is that a lofty goal, assimilation? Is that a or or should we continue to be different?
Well, I think every family has its own culture, and family cultures are very important. It makes family life rich and beautiful. And so the hope is that you develop a family culture that your children are well aware of so they know what to anticipate and to expect. Nothing's like knowing that at 5 o'clock, mom and dad call for dinner and that's our time together.
All right. Even
Or,
even if everyone else in the neighborhood never has dinner together at 5.
yeah, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
but it may not be that. Maybe you
Mm-hmm.
decide because nobody else is having dinner at 5 and that's the time all the kids in the neighborhood are out playing together, that you might be able to negotiate a time that works for everyone in the household.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And yeah, there are going to be some things that are non-negotiable. There might be some things that just are the way they are, and that's how our family functions. But there are opportunities as a family in family meetings to have dialogue about what that could look like. With a little give and take, families go a long way. A little communication, even a 5-year-old, can add to the culture of the family with ideas and suggestions. So my hope is that we can still hold on to some of our cultural values, our family values, and also learn from new strategies that are out there that help us to do things differently or better so that we create families that are present, that are aware, that are loving each other, and coming from a place not of fear, but of faith.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Nyasha Smith-Ruddock for joining me today. And you have 4 lovely children, and I
Thank you.
wish you many, many years of happiness in your service. And
you.
till we meet again. Right. Well,
Till we
thank
meet
you. Thank you,
Okay.
Renee. Till next
Bye-bye.
time. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
So no matter your background or childhood upbringing, abusive or permissive, we strive for improvement in our child rearing practices. Nyasha added that apology wasn't something past generations did very well and goes a long way. The steps that Nyasha outlined are not always easy. I believe, as well as Nyasha, that physical discipline has links to slavery and ownership. Parenting is stewardship, not ownership. I need to have Nyasha back for part 2. Well, this is Dr. Christine Ince wishing you a balanced mind, body, and soul. Please like, share, and subscribe.